Hello, everyone. Happy Friday. Welcome to the weekly show of What is School For? My name is Dr. I am the CEO of Classroom Without Walls and the host of this weekly live streaming show. On this show, I interview leading education professionals, parents, students, business leaders, entrepreneurs to come here to discuss, debate, and disrupt education. Our goal is to future proof the next generation. Today, I'm really excited and honored to have Professor Bevin Clare on the show to talk about something that I have really never heard about, but I'm super excited to learn more about, which is how we can leverage the world as our classroom. And Bevan and her children, they have been traveling to 40 plus countries. Oh my God. I feel like most people don't even go to that many countries for their entire life. So that is really incredible. And for those of you who don't know Bevan, she is an herbalist and nutritionist and professor and program director of the Masters of Science in Clinical Herbal Medicine at the University of Maryland, which is where also I got my PhD. So I'm super excited. And we're going to talk about word schooling and her journey as a homeschooling mom, as a full-time working mom, and how she balances everything. And if you are interested in traveling all over the globe with your children, this is the interview. You have to stay, you have to watch for the entire hour. And we are live on all the social media channels. And I highly recommend you guys join us live on Amazon Live, where you are going to see a list of books, parenting books, disruptive education books, and homeschooling books that I have personally reviewed and recommended for you. So just enter in your browser classroom without was.live, and you should be able to join us live on Amazon Live and see the list of books that I highly recommend. And as always, a big shout out to StreamYard for being a sponsor of Classroom Without Walls. And StreamYard is my favorite third party tool to go live and on social media. So in the comment section, there is a link that allows you to check out StreamYard for free for 2 weeks. So check it out and let me know if you have any questions. Without any further ado, Bevin, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
Yes, really honored to have you here. And this is something that I'm super excited. And also, by the way, everyone, let me know in the comment section where you guys are joining us live from, social media wise and geographically speaking. So, Bevan, you have been educator and professor for so many years, and I'm curious to hear how has your role as an educator, as a college professor, influenced your perspective on parenting and your perspective on education?
That is so interesting to explore because you know those of us who are in higher education, unless we are actually in education in higher education, we get into this type of teaching because we know a lot about our discipline, not
Mhm.
because anyone ever taught us to be a teacher. And so I think that's interesting. Out there, like K through 12, people are taught, this is how you teach. And then you get into universities, and it's more just, oh, you know a lot about bugs or herbs or whatever, you should go teach at a university. And so, there's goods and bads of that, of course, right? Is that, you can end up, it's a mixed bag, what you get as a university, the quality of instruction and so on. But for me, in a way, I've been learning about how to do this well as learning about how to home educate my kids.
Mhm.
And so much of what we're doing is all about exploration and discovery. So, in my classroom at the university, I do very little lecture.
Mhm.
There's no workbooks and worksheets. It's all about asking the right questions and allowing my students to explore their passions and interests. To be able to meet whatever goals that we have as an accredited university, and not that different than working with my kids, where it's
Mhm.
their passions, their interests, the questions that we have. And as a parent, I do have some, goalposts in my mind of that I'd like them to get to certain places or to understand certain concepts in the world, but they get to do it in their own way. So
Mm.
there's a lot of similarities between kids and I think a healthy learning environment in higher education.
Yeah, I love that. Reminds me. So I think last year I interviewed Dr. Esther Wojcicki. Do you know her?
I don't know.
She is the mom for the CEO of YouTube,
Okay.
and yeah, and some other amazing kids. And she mentioned the same thing. She was like, I asked her, what do you think are some old practices of education that must be disrupted? And she mentioned the number one is lecturing, and she was like, that is just no longer serving our students. So I want to go one step deeper. Like, why do you think I even today I still see lecturing as a very common pedagogical approach among
Mhm.
many universities and especially K-12. So why do you think, what are some of the dangers? Why is this a bad approach? Why should we avoid? Why is this not good?
Yeah, I think that there's places where lecturing can be useful. I mean, there are compelling moments where you just want to listen to someone tell a story for sure. But as a way to convey information, it's kind of boring and it's very passive and it's really easy to zone out and just, do that. For me as a professor, it's also kind of boring. I mean, to walk into a classroom. So I'll give you an example that, we do with my students. We do these case study courses, and we used to come in and do, like a lecture about the particular type situation with the case study, and when I'd ask students questions as part of my lecture to make it interactive, and they'd answer. But when I realized that if I don't even lecture at all, and all I do is assign them each a question to look into, and
Mm,
then for them to report back through the different ways that we have, they learn so much more, and I learn so much more. And so I
mm,
think that's the thing is all of a sudden I was learning from them, and they all have so much to offer. So I think that, and also, when you talk about kids, my kids are, they ask questions and they'll receive answers, but I think the maximum amount of time that the answer I can talk for is what, 2 minutes maybe, and then
mm.
or maybe 5 seconds, and then there's a question, then there's a question, then there's a question. So I'm not going to sit there and lecture to them, and I think it's similar with adults and kids.
Yeah, I love that. And the more I'm in education, the more I discovered my job as a teacher and as a mom is not to always cover so much, but to really help my own children and students to uncover what is within them. And that is definitely a shift for me to have, from that top-down approach to like see how much our students and children actually know about life and everything. So here's a great comment. I agree. The university education model isn't really about teaching at all, but about bringing in research money and piling teaching as an added duty is a burden for professors, and why it is largely shopped out to underpaid adjuncts and graduate students. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that it's such a vicious cycle when you become reliant on grant money. I'm really grateful that the program I direct isn't, that it's tuition based, and so and we have a lot of full-time faculty, so it ends up being a little different. But higher education, it's very complicated. There's
Mm,
a lot of pluses and minuses, and I think, to me, I'm so inspired by educating children and my children.
mm,
A lot of that comes down to I spent most of my conventional education, of which I've had a lot, as most academics have, just really bored until I got to, grad school. But the rest of it, I was so bored. And I just think if someone had said, but I loved learning. And so that's always, it was so interesting
yeah.
to me. Is like I've always loved learning, but I was bored out of my mind. So if someone had said, what do you want to learn about? I would have loved that. And so
Mm,
that's often what I'm trying to do. And then I, and reflecting on that, I think there's there's also exposure, which is so important because, if I just let my kids learn about what they want to learn about, that's great. But at the same time, they might not know what's out there. And
Mm,
that's where I think world schooling can come in that uh, that it's just there is a million and one opportunities when you
mm.
kind of disrupt their lives and pull them into a place where nothing is familiar, except their family unit and just in some ways everything's familiar and nothing is familiar when you're in a place that's totally different than your home environment.
Yeah,
uh,
I love it. And I think when you are really outside that comfort zone, that is how you have an opportunity to discover who you are, our core
yes.
values. And I really can't wait to ask you. We have so many questions about this. And because this is like other people's dream life, right? Like why I'm going to share your link on the screen in a second. I was like looking at the website, I was like, oh my God, 40 plus countries. How do you even do it? So first share with us what, like, have you always been homeschooling your children, or like did they actually go to a school and then you started homeschooling? So what brought you to homeschooling, and can you share that with us? And then we're going to talk more about work schooling, which I think is
Yeah.
really fascinating.
Well, so both of my parents are teachers. I grew up with a family of teachers, and my mom was an elementary school teacher, and she loved to bring like living experiences into her classroom. So she would like
Mm,
pretend that they were all going to Morocco, and they would spend a few days in Morocco learning and doing all that. So I had this, this concept of education in one way, and I've also been an avid traveler. And before my firstborn was going into uh, elementary school into kindergarten, I went to the elementary school and to get a tour, and then I sat down, I remember, with the principal and asked a lot of questions about how much school we could miss. And I kept
mm.
pushing, I'm like, well, exactly how many days
I love
before, the police come knocking at my door? And so I was really pressing it. And finally she looked at me and said, the thing is, do you really want to be that parent? Like, this is it's school, it's like you're either in or you're out in a way, and it's going to be hard for you to constantly be not wanting to participate. I also was really not thrilled with what I saw walking around in the school, where a lot of kids were on iPads doing their
Mm,
lessons, and I was thinking, gosh, I can do that at home. Well, and in the end she just said, have you ever thought of homeschooling? And so I think, like a lot of parents, I was like, yeah, this is right for my child now. But immediately after that, I suddenly realized, right, this is the this is the right path for my family. So
mm,
we've homeschooled from the beginning. We are, I would say, eclectic homeschoolers is the term
mm,
I would use. So for me and my spouse, we see our, especially one of our children, is really geared towards sciences, so we keep up with certain curricula. Like, we have a math curriculum, we have a language arts curriculum that we do, but then the rest of it just happens
mm.
in there. So yeah, we know that we've always done that, and everybody figures out the right way to do it and what makes sense for you, and I love having that freedom to do that.
Yeah, that sounds great. So, like, at what age did you bring your kids to travel with you? I know you do lots of speaking engagement. So, do you always bring your children with you? So, how did you integrate this traveling part into their homeschooling education?
So they've traveled since they were, in fact, when I was pregnant with my son, my first, all these people would say to me, "Well, I hope you got the traveling out of your system." Like, it was something I had to purge out, and I um, was like, "No, no, no." so, so we actually bought my son a plane ticket before he was born, not knowing whether,
What?
what what baby that would be, just baby, and to Vietnam. I was determined by 6 months to make sure that we would travel. And so they've always traveled since the beginning. And yeah, a lot of it is, sometimes I'll be working somewhere. I have found that there's children everywhere,
Mm,
and that pretty much any conference or things like that I'm speaking at, either I'll bring someone along, like a family member or someone, or I'll just ask. Every conference organizer I've ever met has said, "Oh yeah, no, I know someone who could probably watch your kids and do that." And I, compensated and everything. So we figured it out. Now they're older; they're 8 and 11, so they can take care of themselves to some
Mm.
extent. They're used to seeing mom work and do all of that. So I really wanted them. I see for the privileged parents and children out there, I see how comfortable our kids can be. I
Mm.
mean, they always have the food they need. They're warm. Life is predictable, and
Mm.
to me, I feel like our resilience comes from safe disruptions in our
Mm.
life. So I'm not talking about trauma. I'm talking about the resilience that you build from things, unexpected situations and new things, and everything being new and different and change. So I've always been really interested in kind of disrupting their patterns so that we don't
Mm.
get too settled in some ways.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Here's a great question, which is also one of my questions. And I'm also curious, like when you travel to a country, for example, like how long do you actually stay there? So if you are traveling so frequently, and how do you manage uh their your friends children's social circles, right? Like in
Mhm.
terms of stability. Because I remember I when we were traveling a lot and before COVID, one of my friends actually told me, and she and her entire family, they traveled a lot when she was young, but she never really get to have friends for a long period of time. So how did you manage that? And also your own work, how do you balance everything?
Yeah, so the socialization part, I will say there's different types of world schoolers, and so for us, we have a home base, so we spend
Mm.
maybe about 40%, 30% of our year at our home base,
Wow.
and everybody does need to buy into this. This is a family thing. I don't want to force my kids to do this. So how do we do socialization? Well, we are really, really into our friends, and they understand the package deal. And I actually find that we are able to maintain friendships by being present. And I mean, I message my friends all the time. My kids do. They chat on different devices. They play online games together sometimes.
Mm.
And I think, like all relationships, you just have to put that effort in.
Mm.
And even from a distance, that can actually naturally happen. The longest time we've been away was 6 months during the pandemic last September, when I saw things getting very complicated.
Mm.
I made some pretty drastic decisions, and we left to find a place where we felt like we were going to be able to live in a way that was a little more sustainable and healthy for us.
Mm.
And I was worried about our friendships, to be honest. But
Mm.
they just happen as long as you are good friends. And I don't think with
Mm.
good friends you have to see somebody. I mean, we all know that, right? You all have probably good friends that, because they are in touch and they care about you and they make themselves known, and you know what's going on in each other's lives. You don't actually physically have to be in those spaces. So the kids do have that kind of stability piece. As far as my work goes, it is definitely a juggle,
Mm.
and we figure it out. But I find I have time, before they get up. With time zone changes, sometimes it works out really well. In the evenings, there's often a lot of chatting with friends or family, screen time, things like that, and I can, get a good 5 hours of work in, staying up
Mm.
late and so on. So it ends up being fine, but it's not easy always, for sure. But there's a lot
Yeah.
of us who do it. The other thing I want to add is there are world schooling hubs all over the world. So there's places
Wow.
where world schoolers gather. And these hubs are opportunities for kids to put down roots, roots forever long you stay. I mean, some world schoolers would stay for 3 or 4 months, make friends, and then see each other. That these are all people who have this lifestyle. So it's amazing how you end up seeing them in one country and then another country, and we
Wow,
all
it
move
sounds
around.
so exciting.
It is.
That's amazing. I think every decision we make, there is like pros and cons. I think it really
Yeah.
just depends on what makes sense to you and your
Right.
family. So I'm curious, you mentioned that you have two children, 11, and how old is the
8.
other? 8. Oh, wow. They are pretty young. They're pretty, and they have been to 40 plus countries. Is that right?
Yeah, and you asked for how long. I mean, with traveling, sometimes it can be a pretty brief thing, and I don't usually try to count countries necessarily, but it also, when I'm talking about it out there, it's nice to provide some context. So
Mm.
sometimes we're, out there doing things fairly quickly, and other times we're sinking in and doing things a lot more slowly. Places like Europe, it can be a 10-minute Uber ride or a 30-minute train ride, and you're in a different country. Other places, we've
That's
gone through some
right.
hotel quarantines and to get into a country, so you stay for a while.
That's right. That's right. So how do your children respond to this? Very innovative. Do they have like, I mean, are most of their friends homeschoolers, or most of their students, their friends like traditional schoolers?
Mm.
And yeah, how do your own children respond to this very innovative parenting approach?
I think a little bit of both. We do have a lot of homeschool friends, and then we have other friends that are public schooled. And I think it all comes down to people who have a lot of passions and are willing to put some effort into
Mm,
relationships. And we have some friends that we'll travel with at times and go to different places. And I think the children respond incredibly well because they learn a lot of perspective about the way things are in different
mm,
places. I mean, they have enormous perspective on food and culture. I mean, they're getting better at it, but of course they mix up things all the time too.
mm.
When they were little, and they'd be like, I want to go to back to China and get pretzels," and I'm like, "No, China's not the soft pretzel country." So, they make these connections. They also are brilliant travelers, and they're able to,
Mm,
traveling can be stressful. And it's one of the reasons
mm,
why I, have these courses to teach people how to do this, and to prevent a lot of stressful situations. And they are they're so brilliant. Even when I get really stressed because something is going wrong,
mm,
they often have that perspective that is the things that I've taught them, which is, okay, let's turn this into an adventure. Like, we're
mm.
safe, everything's okay, all of this is out of our control. So our option is, sit here and be stressed, or turn it into an adventure and learn something from it.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And you mentioned earlier that, like you guys spend 30% of your time at home and 70% traveling. I think that percentage is like incredible to many people. And how do you like, I have on the screen here, which is your course. Everyone should definitely check it out. So I know in your course, you talked about like, how can people even afford this, right? So like, maybe you can just briefly talk about this. I'm sure this is a question that you got asked a lot because we know traveling is very expensive. So how do you like afford this?
Yeah, so you can do traveling on all sorts of budgets, for sure. And if you can afford to, like, well, especially if you can afford to, like, go to Disney or something, you can
Mm,
afford to take that same budget and travel for a month somewhere.
mm,
There are lots of ways to do this that can be significantly more affordable. We are not, I mean, relative to many people in the world, of course, we're wealthy, but we are, a family that has to constantly look at budgets. We get our
mm,
paycheck, we figure out how that's going to be used and allocated. And I spend a lot of time getting deals and bargains. I mean, that is
mm,
definitely something I'm really interested in. Our plane tickets are often the most expensive thing. And so I spend a lot of time looking at plane tickets and choosing. And that's one of the things I train people to do in the course, is how to actually find these bargain tickets. Because the difference between a $1,500 ticket to Asia and a $400 ticket to Asia
mm,
is, times four people or three people, is
mm,
huge. So
mm,
um so how do we afford it? I find that, using things like Airbnb, all different, we also do all the points and miles games that
mm,
some people are into. There are a lot of possibilities. So you can travel if you can afford to get somewhere.
mm.
Once there are so many places that once you get there, travel can be significantly less than your day-to-day living in the United
That's
States.
true.
And then if you want to spend more, you can. But I'm always surprised. I find that actually I often spend more money at home. If But it depends on what you're doing when you're abroad. I mean, there are a ton of ways to spend money, but there's also a ton of ways to keep it incredibly cheap. And
Mm,
and so my first long travel experience as an adult, I was a young adult and I just bought a one-way ticket to Asia, and I had a budget of $5 a day. That was, I mean, for everything that I did, food and lodging and transport. And this was in the 90s, so it was a little different, but I absolutely could do that.
Mm.
There was no problem doing that. And some days I spent $2, some days I spent $7. But I don't do that with my family now, but I do keep a pretty strict budget, and I'm often able to do everything that we need to within that budget.
Oh, that's such a like great way to look at it, right? Like, just like, yeah, I'm sure if we look at our day-to-day expenses, we'll probably be shocked how much we're actually spending versus traveling. And then you are also gaining that very unique perspective on life. I'm sure your children, like I think with many of the students that I interacted, they haven't traveled that much. So they see this see life as kind of a reality, right? One reality. But with
Right.
children who travel a lot, like you mentioned, this, multiple realities. People are like doing things differently. So can you share some of your most memorable stories with us, with your children on some of those trips? I think that's really fascinating.
Sure. Yeah, there's so many different things that we have done. I was just looking, I have a little list of experiences um that I absolutely love. And so I think that sometimes it's traveling for a long time or world schooling is different than going on vacation. So that's one of the things I wanted to point out, because I think the mindset when people are on vacation, I hear people say this all the time. Oh, don't worry about it. Just do it. You're on vacation. Like, oh, people see us doing like math or something and they're like, why would you make your kids do this? You're on vacation. And I'm always saying, well, actually, we're not. It's like this is a different way of life. And so
Mm,
sometimes that means if you get your 2 weeks of vacation every year, yeah, you don't really want to mess around going into the local grocery store and buying some food for a picnic. Like that's, you're just going to go out somewhere nice, and you're on vacation. But I think when you're world schooling, those experiences are actually what makes it real. Is like, oh, you end up
mm,
in this cool little spice market and you find some kind of interesting foods that you've never had, and you end up with this wacky picnic, and the cost is 5% of what a nice restaurant would have ended up
mm,
being, but you're bringing it real. And so I think a lot of it is teaching the kids about those different experiences of wherever you are. So a fun experience that I'll say that has a little bit to do like that is, we were in Vancouver. I was there for work doing a lecture, and we were walking around and the kids saw this, flyover Vancouver simulator experience, and they were like, "Oh, that sounds so cool. We want to do that." And I looked at it and it was $45 a person, and I was like, we're not doing some simulator for $45 a person. Like this is not going to happen. And they're like, oh, but it sounds so cool. And I'm like, no, this is not how I'm going to choose to spend our money. I mean, there's four of us. It's like a 20-minute thing. No. So that was that. But then as we kept walking and walking, we were watching all these seaplanes take off and land, because that's how people get around in the islands there. And we
wow.
walked by the airport, and I remember I popped in and said, how much does it cost, these like commuter things? And they said, well, if you can go right now, we can do one for $80, a private plane, like for a short flight. And I remember thinking, that's worth it. Like, let's do that. So we actually, I mean, we all just like
Wow.
jumped in a plane and off we went for this little quick thing. That was, life changing. I've never been in a seaplane. It was like this totally, my son sat up front with the co-pilot control, and I think so. We always try to look at local life, and like we were in Rarotonga and the Cook Islands, which is one of my favorite places in the world. And I would get the newspaper every day, and I would look and see what was happening. And so like there would be a dance performance at the local school, or a
Mm,
costume contest for the holidays, or there'd be just anything. And even if it doesn't sound, things that wouldn't sound very interesting where we live, that I'd probably be like, yeah, it's almost always interesting if you're somewhere where the culture is totally different, even if you're
mm,
just people watching and figuring it out. And then people are also very curious about what brings you there, and they're
mm,
friendly. And so kids are kind of an in to all of this. Like the kids speak the language of play. So it doesn't matter where you are or what you're doing or what language they speak. They just immediately can play with each other. Whereas adults, I think we have more difficulty because rely on language so much.
That's right. That's right. I love it. I think you made such a great distinction. This is a way of life, right? It's not like tourism. It's not like, I think when you are traveling for vacation, you just kind of stop by all the touristy spots and then
Mm.
check, take a picture, make a post,
Right.
like vacation is over. But I think what you are talking about is a lot more profound, a lot deeper. It's a way of life. And I love how you are really immersing into the local life and reading newspaper, checking out what is happening. All those are some really great ideas. And did your children happen to pick up some local languages as they travel, or like it's like not
Yeah,
vacation
they'll
time?
pick up phrases. It depends on where we're going. And they've actually attended language schools in different places. I have to say languages are not their real interest. At the same time, their ability to communicate without language, I think, is good.
Oh
And
wow.
and that's something they watch me do a lot because there's so many times where I don't know the language, but I need to ask for something or tell something. And so sometimes it's using technology. I think that they learn how to do that. You can hold a mobile phone with Google Translate and have a conversation with someone, and the phone will just continue to translate for you. So there are a lot of tools like this that you can use. So yeah, and I think just those day to day life pieces. I mean, things are more complicated, but I think in a
Mhm.
really good way. Often when you're immersed in another culture, because you do have to figure out, how does this work? I mean, I remember just mailing a box. I had to mail a box of warm weather gear we had from I can't remember what country we were in, but I remember, and it took a half a day to mail this
Mhm.
box, but it was such an adventure to go
Yeah.
to all these different places where we had to, and all these people helped us, and people played with the kids, and it was such an interesting thing.
Yeah, and here's another great question from Mike. Sorry, I missed it. So he was asking, saying that, and his daughter is more introverted.
Mhm.
And do you think this type of word schooling will only work for children who are more outgoing, extroverted? Oh, great question.
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't think so at all. I mean, I have one introverted and one extroverted child, and so I think if they're not looking to make a lot of connections with people all the time, then that's fine. And then there are often moments where you can um, sit and be with people. I think unlike in a classroom, a conventional classroom, you're not forced into situations of group work or things like that that you might not want to be in. So you can take it as calmly or as slowly as you want.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think maybe because of that, an experience like this can really help the personality to adapt and to make it easier and to see that, oh wow, it's actually not as scary as I thought. Yeah. So I'm curious, Bevan, like you mentioned earlier that your children actually follow some curricula like math, literature. So how is, like, I know there are, even with us, there are no typical days, but
Yeah.
like, if you can say, like, how do they spend their day to day? Like, do they kind of spend like a few hours working on their literature and then spend the rest of their day, especially when you guys are traveling, just like walking around, checking out what is happening locally? So how do you do it? Like a breakdown. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, we don't have a lot of, there's not a lot of patterns, but I will say that I always carry whatever it is that we need to do that's like a physical thing, like math or something. Often
Mhm.
when we sit down to have a meal, we'll eat for a little bit and then we'll sit and kind of, uh, and do that, which is great for my kids because they're not very fast eaters. Like a lot of kids, they kind of pick at food. So this way we can get some stuff done and pick at food. Sometimes we'll do it right when we wake up. But again, it's one of the advantages, especially I imagine most of your folks are homeschooling, but we do school year round.
Mm,
So in the end, if and we pretty much school all the time. I mean, there's, on their birthdays, they don't do it. So it's really just a little bit. I would say
mm,
with my 11-year-old, the structured schooling is about an hour a day. With my 8-year-old, it's probably less. That doesn't mean that there isn't constant learning and investigation going on all the time.
Mm,
My son also has a tutor in an area that I have reached my expertise, and that's pretty awesome. I mean, his tutors in India, we can schedule them whenever, and that's actually very affordable. And so there are a lot of possibilities like that. They both like outschool, which can be done in any time zone. So there's a lot of things like that that would just kind of fit in when
mm,
we do that. And I will say, that it's their choice of commitment. My son does a Dungeons and Dragons homeschool kind of social type of thing that will be from 1 to 3 in the morning when on our next trip. And I'm like, this is up to you if you want to get up in the middle of the night once a week and do this. And he does. So that's great. I don't really want to do that, but
wow.
thankfully, that's them. So yeah, it's we don't have a super pattern, but the idea is that every day we do a little bit of this type of stuff. And for those people who unschool, it just comes up otherwise. I mean, currency conversions are fantastic
Mm.
for math, and I'm always amazed how quickly they pick up on that when they need to figure out how much things cost.
That's right.
So,
That's right. Yeah, I think, most people think learning only happens inside the classroom. And I totally disagree. And now observing my own kids, how they learn, very different. And just last week, a few weeks ago, I interviewed this amazing mom. She's an unschooler. And she said that her children really are very good at doing very young kids, subtraction, addition, because they only have one iPad. So they have to calculate, I can only play the iPad for 20 minutes and then I have to give it to my sister or brother. So they're really good at clock, like subtraction. I was like, yeah, what I learned from all those interviews and being educators, that learning has to be really interest driven. When the interest is there, right? Like they can get up at 3 a.m. to do whatever. Most people like, yeah, no, I can't do that. Yeah. Do you agree?
yeah, I think if they're passionate and interested in it, and I often don't know what exactly that will be. I mean, we were
Mm.
just recently in Romania and Bulgaria and Austria, and I was it was so interesting that my kids were both fascinated by the Black Plague. They wanted to learn everything about the Black Plague, and so for us, that kind of sends me on a quest of finding like monuments to it or different places where we can
Wow.
learn about it, and even just talking about it and understanding it. So, and then for me, then that gets into not just history, but also you get into life sciences, and they want to know how it works and what it is and what's comparable today, and and so it's you never know what you're going to be exposed to, which is really interesting. And then other things I think they might be really interested in, they're like, nah, no, and that's fine too. It's the same for me. We learn from what we're exposed to and immersed in and find our passions.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And so you have, as I introduced you earlier, you have been an educator for so many years. So based on your observation, what are some really compelling differences between students who are raised by the conventional, schooling approach versus children who are, word schoolers, homeschoolers, unschoolers? Do you see any differences among kind of those two group of children?
I see some big differences, and I think that it's I'm generalizing, of course, right? So there are kids that are
Yeah.
thriving in a conventional school environment, but I think that so one of the differences is that they're very used to being around different ages,
Mm.
and they understand how to like play and integrate and engage and care for. Different ages and younger children. So I was always amazed when we started going to homeschooling things, and I had a 2-year old, how often 11, 12, 13-year-old kids would assist my 2-year-old without me asking or things like that but they had this mindset where you get a big group of kids playing. There's kids that are 4 and kids that are 13 and kids and I think often that is like you're not going to get a 13-year-old often to play with an 8-year-old
Mm.
in some environments. So that was one thing I noticed. I also know a couple things that just and these are my personal experiences, that I find that kids don't find out that things that they should or shouldn't be doing, they do it based on their own needs and their own hearts. So for
Mm,
example, my son is really very affectionate, and I watch the other 11, 12, 13-year-old boys who are homeschooled that are very like physically affectionate with their parents or caregivers or their
mm,
friends, because no one's ever said, "Oh yeah, it's not so cool to like
mm,
snuggle with your mommy when you're
mm,
13."
mm,
Um, and I think that if we had more 13-year-old boys who could go for comfort and support and snuggle if
mm,
they wanted to, if no one told them, and also I think the same thing goes with like being heavily immersed in a subject area, and
mm,
um, that other people maybe would even tease you about, like, "Oh,
mm.
that's so dorky," or "Why are you, such a nerd," or anything. Nobody that these are not concepts that they know. So if they are, if fully immersed in something and they want to geek out on it, everyone is like, "This is great. I love hearing about all of these things."
Mm,
Kids that are neurodivergent, all that. There's no bullying, there's no teasing, there's no conformity.
mm,
And I love that. I look at um, the freaky little homeschool kids that are part of our community, and I say this in the most loving way. And I just think, stay weird, stay immersed and follow these paths, and don't worry about what other people from the outside might be thinking when they're looking in, because it's awesome what you're doing.
yeah, I love that. That is so, especially for teenagers, they really have that peer pressure to
Right.
conform, to be like their friends. And on top of that, when you guys are traveling internationally, and that, introduce another layer of diversity, like you, that I think that really helps you to be more confident in who you are when you see that everybody is so different. So that is really fascinating. Reminds me of last week I interviewed unschooling mom to mom. I don't know if you know her.
Hmm.
Yes, I interviewed her, and she's talking about a very interesting story of some children who were homeschooled or unschooled, and they went back to school, and they really geek out on some of the things, and they wanted to do the homework, but they got laughed at by
Right.
their classmates. They're like, you don't have to do that. You're
Hmm.
like, why? Because I want to learn this. This is really interesting. I want to do this because I'm interested in this for the sake of learning. Whereas the traditional school kids, they were like, you don't have to do this for the homework. So it is really
Right.
interesting to see that contrast and kind of also hear you saying this in a similar way. So really, and to really preserve that curiosity in a way, right?
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, for me and for my spouse, preserving the love of learning is the number one reason why we're doing
Mm,
this. Is there,
crazy.
to me, there's, in it, unless we're talking about death or something, the worst thing I can imagine having to my children is for them to lose that love of learning, that passion and interest to want to learn more. And I see that, like apathy and just kids that aren't interested in things. And so, yeah, I love just finding that and being able to shape what I'm doing. I mean,
Mm,
I have my son is just so into certain things, like, but he doesn't like a lot of the books, other novels and things that other kids like to read. And it took me a while to realize he loves reading manuals. I buy him these like
mm,
technical manuals, and he's like, these are great. And I'm thinking, "Ugh." But that's his thing. And so finding out what really works for them. It's pretty amazing. And also that they just get exposed to these different things in different places, so they can discover that and meet a lot of interesting adults who have diverse
mm.
experiences as well.
Yeah. And you mentioned this earlier, that mixed age. I think that's a big deal. Just a few days ago, I did a survey on LinkedIn. I was like, what do you think are some missing link in today's students? And I think communication is very missing because, and someone resonated with me because our students, when you think about it, they spend their entire life only conversing with people of the same
Right,
age,
right,
and that is not really helping them developing their communication skills. And I
right,
noticed that many of my students, and they felt really intimidated by me. You can just tell their nonverbal
right.
cues just like off when they are talking to me or
Yeah.
older people versus conversing with their peers. And I think they just don't get to practice a lot.
Yes, this is, and I would say this is another one I'd add that's very different. Is I notice homeschoolers like adults a lot. Like
Mm.
they're often very interested and engaged and happy to talk with adults. I had a very profound, when you're asking about how I started some of this. When I first started homeschooling my kindergartner, I met a kid in the parking lot of the library to buy some eggs from him, and he had raised his chickens, and I was very homeschool curious at this point. I wanted to, and he was 13. And I remember um, he sold me the eggs. And the first thing I noticed was like he was making eye contact. He was this 13-year-old at the peak of awkwardness as far as like the physical awkward stuff. But he, eye contact, and he was very friendly and really personable. And I said, "Oh, is raising chickens something you're passionate about? Is this part of your homeschooling?" And he said, "No, I just try to make money for my passions." And I was like, "What are your passions?" And he said, "I'm passionate about entomology as an indicator of stream health in our local
Wow.
streams in Montgomery County." And I was like, "Really?" And he said, "Yeah, if you just learn some simple entomology, you can go to any stream environment, and with just some measurements, you can find out how healthy that is." And he said, "So, I've been really passionate about this, and now I actually educate Montgomery County elementary schoolers how to do this. We do field
Mm.
trips." And I was like,
That's
"Really?
amazing.
You do this?" And just the way he explained it with such confidence and articulation, and there was no like avoiding the eye contact, grunting, feeling shy that I would have expected. And at that moment, I just thought, you know, I want that. Like I
I
want
love
that.
this path. Yes.
Yeah, I want to find that. I want kids to feel so comfortable in whatever it is that they love in that way, and to be able to dive deeply
Mm.
instead of feeling like you have to do a little bit of everything to pick something and go deep.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I have interviewed some really non-conventional homeschoolers on my show, and oh, I'm just so impressed by their communication skills. Very, very good. Their ability to articulate, as you mentioned,
Yeah.
and be confident in their opinions. That is really amazing. I also love how you mentioned, I think my Wi-Fi is not very good today. I also love how you mentioned, Bevan, how they know what they're passionate about. I'm not sure about you. I was a college professor for 10 plus years. And one question that really annoys me a lot is like children, they don't know what they are passionate about, even when they are like 20 something, even graduating seniors. You ask them, oh, I really don't know. I haven't even figured this out. And I think, and they feel like taking more classes will help them figure out. I don't think so. I think that what they need to do is to travel, to
Yeah.
embrace this more, use more real life to help them discover their passion, not sitting in the classroom taking even more classes. I don't know. Do you have that observation?
Yeah, I think that exposure is really good, and that's probably why they think they should take more classes because they'll be exposed to more things. But I think that actually there are other better ways, and for many people that go through a more conventional academic path, they talk about that gap year in between high school
Mm,
and college, where they travel, as being just hugely profound. But it doesn't have to be a gap year. It can be something very different than that, and so I do think that's one of the best things. To me, when I've seen teenagers go through a very difficult time, because I have a lot of friends that have had teenagers in conventional schooling go through a difficult time, I often think, and this is my bias because this is my lifestyle, is like, what happens if you scoop them up and you just
mm,
go somewhere? You go away for 6 months if they can afford this, which a lot
mm,
of them could actually. Um, and just change everything, like take away all those pressures that are pushing
mm,
on these kids and all the conformity and all of that, and just be somewhere where it's not like that, where it's
mm,
different. What will happen? And also
mm,
just the closeness. To me, I love being around my kids. It doesn't mean they don't drive me bonkers and that I don't need a break. I'm not some magical parent that's just like, oh, they're perfect and they never make me insane. But I love being around them, and I love the opportunity to be able to spend that time with them.
mm,
It's all you know valuable to me. So, yeah, I wish people would travel more because I think we would understand each other better. We would get along
mm,
better. we would have so many different perspectives because we have so many assumptions about people in
Mm,
the world. And even my extremely educated, very open-minded friends, I'm always amazed with the things that they think about places where I'm visiting. Like, we spent a lot of time in the Middle East last year, and the assumptions and the generalizations and judgments around,
oh,
um, it's fascinating. And you
yeah.
always have to reevaluate a lot of what you think you know in different environments.
Yeah, you really see how our reality is really socially constructed, right? Within by the government and media. I grew up in China, and I had lots of assumptions about people from Japan. And when I was study abroad in my early 20s, doing my master degree at Syracuse University, so that was my first time to really get to know someone actually from Japan, and she's my roommate. And that, oh my God, changed all of my assumptions. I was like, wow, it was like really a life changing moment for me. I was like, yeah, I so agree with you that, we need to really use our own senses to draw our own conclusions, to make our own judgment about other people, and become less judgmental. So I love it. That's definitely another benefit of traveling, see real life in using our own eyes.
Yes, yes. And not and ourselves, but also watching others and the perception. So, we've spent quite a bit of time in China, and yeah, there is a lot of like bias and judgment and racism. And you hear a lot about this when you're talking with people, and they don't necessarily know, because again, the exposure is very low into certain situations. And so for me, that's also fascinating to introduce my kids to, because we'll
Mm,
get through these discussions, and this happens all the time when we're traveling, and they'll say, are the things that that person said true? And I'm like, well,
mm,
what do you think? Like, what do you think's happening
mm,
here? And so that's information literacy and discernment around
yeah,
all of that is key. And I think they learn a
absolutely.
lot of that when they're
Yeah,
traveling.
absolutely. I think those are essential life skills, right?
Yeah.
Like critical thinking, right? And then in China, you can also talk about media censorship, all those things. And that is, I think those are the skills that will really prepare our kids for the future. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, such a fascinating conversation. I know you and I can just like keep asking you questions. But yeah, to wrap everything up for other parents who are thinking about this, like this sounds so fascinating, traveling all over the globe and use our world as our classroom. So, what are maybe share some advice with them, and also tell us more about your course and where people can check it out. I mean, it's here, but like tell us more about it.
Right. So I have ready to roam courses, and you can check them out. There's a URL there, or you can go to bevinclair.com, also works. And the idea is, because people always said, "Oh, you should run trips." And I'm like, yeah, no, I don't I don't need to take care of more people on a trip. I was like, but I can show you how to do it. And so the courses really take people all the way from, like, finding destinations, finding the very best bargains or convenient plane tickets, how to work out a budget, how to plan an itinerary. I really try to take people from the beginning to the end of doing this in a very practical, detailed way. But I also have a totally free course right now that is on how to travel during the COVID-19 pandemic. And that looks at safety, at logistics, especially like changing laws and requirements, and it looks at our responsibility as a global citizens as to how we make sure we're doing this in a good way and not causing harm when we travel. And so that's totally free. You can check that out on my website, bevinclair.com, or on the Podia site. And yeah, I hope you join me, because I think that the more of us travel, the better. And I do have a Facebook community, also the Ready to Roam community. If you're just interested in poking around and talking a little bit about travel with people, you're welcome there.
It's awesome. Yeah. And so where are you guys traveling to next? Are you right now? You are in the US right now, right?
We are, yeah. So we have a big trip coming up. Um, And we have a long list of places we want to go, and we look for to find out what's a bargain. So the kids and I will be visiting a place that we really love, Abu Dhabi, for a little bit, and heading on to Sri Lanka and India after that. So we're really looking forward to
That's
that.
amazing. I'm curious, like when you pack,
Oh my
like
gosh.
like 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 how much do you have to pack for a family of four people? Like suitcases, things like that.
Yeah, it's
Wow.
like the books and laptops are just ridiculous. And then I'm like tablets, laptops, tablets, laptops. But no, we can you can get pretty much anything you need anywhere in the world. And so actually, I mean that can be an adventure right there. When
Mhm.
I'm traveling for a while and I'm like, you know what, I need new underwear. It's like today we're gonna go figure out how that works here, which is interesting actually. So we figure it out. We try to pack pretty lightly. Well, we try to track very lightly, but not ridiculously. Yeah, packing is a whole art, and that's something I also try to share in the courses because, I pack over the course of a few weeks because I keep thinking of things I need and things I don't, and trimming things down, and I don't want to forget anything.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, like just for us have a, like a 10-day trip to China, I'll be like thinking about, I feel like, there's so
Yes,
much stuff. I mean, especially when you have children, like, yeah,
right.
but that sounds like really fascinating. So when are you guys leaving? Do you know yet?
When
Yeah,
or
when?
end of the month? Yeah, so
Oh,
we're gonna go end of
around
this month.
Thanksgiving? Oh, wow.
Yeah, yeah, around Thanksgiving. And the reason for that, to be honest, just so this is so my husband can't join us until the middle of December, and his plane ticket was 3 times more than ours. So this is a good example of world schooling and homeschooling
Wow.
that we were actually able to get our 3 plane tickets for this whole trip for the same price as his one because we're leaving 2 weeks earlier and not up against those holidays. So a real
Mhm.
advantage of world schooling, people love to travel in the start of January, in the beginning of September, in these times where nobody else is going and
Mhm.
things are empty. There's tons of bargains out there, and so there's a lot of ways to keep it affordable and logistically much easier if you have the flexibility to do so.
Yeah, and how long will you guys like? Is this trip like half a year, like a
Yeah,
few months?
we'll be back in March, so that's the
Wow.
plan. Yeah.
Sounds fascinating. Where can people like follow you? I have your Instagram here, but it's mainly about like where can people learn more about your trips, your traveling with
Right.
your family, or the same?
Yes. So much of my social media is around my primary work and how I get out there mostly, which is around medicinal plants and spices and nutrition and so on. But there's Ready to Roam is online on Facebook, and I've started to post more on there about that. Instagram, you can see that right there, and you can also subscribe to my newsletter on my website at
Mhm.
bevinclaire.com. But really, at this point, is like I've been very visible around herbalism and nutrition and more people say, but we want to hear about the world schooling part. And that's always
I
just been my
know. It's like
personal life. So,
that.
yeah, this is all changing.
I mean, that was my struggle. I was getting prepared for this interview, but everything's about herbal medicine. Like I
Yes,
need to
yes,
discover more about. Like, people
right.
can check out this interview now. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. So that's been a big change. I mean, that was a profound moment for me where I suddenly realized, wait, maybe this isn't just my personal lifestyle. Maybe
Mhm.
this is something because people would always ask. They just want to know more and more and more. So yeah, so things are shifting and putting those courses out there and getting out there. So it's pretty exciting and fun.
Yeah, fascinating. I can't wait to really like follow your journey and continue to follow your journey and learn. Maybe one day we'll be traveling to the same destination. That would be really cool for our kids, similar age. My children are 10 and 7. So
Uh huh. There you
yeah,
go.
it's perfect.
Perfect.
Yeah,
They're
yeah, that's
very portable,
awesome.
those
Yeah,
kids.
yeah, yeah. Anyway, thank you so much for
Thank
this really
you.
fun, informative, and entertaining interview. I really enjoyed it. And so, everyone, thank you so much for joining us live from all over the globe, virtually. Hopefully, one day we can all meet up in person. And please check out Bevan. And if you are interested in this type of schooling, homeschooling, unschooling, however you want to call it, definitely check out her course. Lots of great information. And I look forward to seeing you again next Friday, same
Absolutely.
time, same location.
All right. Thank you.
Bye,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone.